Hi, everyone. I'm Emma, and what I'm about to share with you might sound like something straight out of a psychological thriller, but I swear on everything I hold dear, every single detail is absolutely true. My parents orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving a fake lawyer, forged documents, and identity theft to steal the $3.2 million oceanfront estate my grandmother left me. Also, they could hand it over to my sister Madison, their precious golden child, who could apparently do no wrong in their eyes. But here's what makes this story even more twisted. They didn't just try to steal my inheritance. They smiled in my face for months while systematically destroying my life behind the scenes, all while making me feel like I was losing my mind. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever questioned your own reality because the people closest to you were gaslighting you, then buckle up, because what happened to me will either validate everything you've suspected about toxic family dynamics, or it'll make you grateful for whatever dysfunction you thought you had. Let me paint you a picture of where this nightmare began. The Rosewood Estate, that's what locals called my grandmother's property, wasn't just a house. It was a masterpiece, built in 1947 by my great-grandfather. This wasn't some modest beach cottage. We're talking about 6,200 square feet of pure coastal elegance, sitting on 4.7 acres of pristine waterfront in Wilmington, North Carolina. The main house featured 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen that could handle a restaurant, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Atlantic Ocean like living artwork. But the crown jewel was the wraparound porch, 800 square feet of covered outdoor paradise, where my grandmother, Rose, had spent countless hours teaching me about life, love, and the importance of standing up for yourself. The property also included a 2-story guest house, a private boat dock, and gardens that had been featured in Southern Living magazine 3 times. Conservative estimates put the current market value at $3.2 million, but in today's crazy real estate market, it could easily fetch $4 million or more. This wasn't just my inheritance, it was my sanctuary, my connection to the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me for who I was. Growing up, I was the perpetual understudy in the drama of our family life. While Madison got the lead role in every story, I was relegated to the background, holding props and making sure everyone else looked good. At Madison's 8th birthday party, she convinced my parents she needed 2 cakes because 8 is such a big number. And somehow I ended up without any cake at all because they ran out. When I finally worked up the courage to ask for a piece, my mother, Catherine, said, "Oh, honey, there's some leftover fruit in the kitchen." That's much healthier anyway. During my high school graduation, where I was valedictorian with a perfect 4.0 GPA and a full scholarship to Duke University, Madison chose that exact moment to announce she was starting her own jewelry business. Suddenly, my 4 years of academic excellence became background noise to her entrepreneurial announcement. The family dinner that was supposed to celebrate my achievements turned into a business planning session for Madison's venture. But the pattern went deeper than just attention-seeking. Madison had this uncanny ability to take credit for my ideas while making it seem like she was doing me a favor. In college, I developed a comprehensive business plan for sustainable coastal tourism as my senior thesis. 3 months later, Madison launched a consulting company using remarkably similar concepts and somehow convinced our parents to invest $85,000 in her startup. When I pointed out the similarities, Catherine dismissed it as great minds thinking alike and suggested I should be proud that your sister values your input. The gaslighting was so subtle, so consistently executed, that I began to question my own perceptions. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining the favoritism? Was I really as incompetent and dramatic as they made me feel? After my divorce from David, a marriage that had been more about meeting family expectations than actual love, I found myself emotionally depleted and financially strained. The settlement had been fair, but starting over at 32 felt overwhelming. When Grandma Rose passed away 6 months later and left me the estate, it felt like a lifeline, not just financially, but emotionally. She had seen something in me that my parents never bothered to notice. I told myself I was only staying at the estate temporarily, maybe a year to regroup, heal from the divorce, and figure out my next chapter. But something magical happened during those first few months. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't editing my thoughts or minimizing my needs to keep peace. I was just existing, authentically, peacefully. I started each morning with coffee on the east-facing porch, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. I renovated the sunroom into an art studio where I could paint without judgment or interruption. I planted a vegetable garden using heirloom seeds I found in Grandma Rose's shed, and every tomato that grew felt like a small victory. For the first time since childhood, I felt genuinely happy. That Saturday morning in March started like any other. The sky was that perfect Carolina blue that makes you believe anything is possible. I had spent the early hours working in the garden, transplanting the herb seedlings I'd started from scratch, when I heard the distinctive sound of expensive tires on gravel. Catherine's silver Lexus SUV, the one with the vanity plates that read Blessed One, pulled into my driveway with the kind of confidence that suggested this visit had been planned well in advance. She emerged wearing a sunshine yellow St. John knit blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, carrying a decorative Williams-Sonoma tin like it was a diplomatic offering. "Surprise!" she called out, her voice carrying that artificial brightness I'd learned to associate with hidden agendas. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought you might enjoy some homemade blueberry muffins." The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. Catherine lived 47 minutes away in the gated community of Harbor Point, and the only reason she'd ever be in the neighborhood was if she'd driven here specifically to see me. But confronting her about small deceptions had never worked in the past. So I just smiled and stepped aside to let her in. Her signature perfume, Tom Ford white suede mixed with the faint scent of entitlement, hit me before her footsteps did. She walked through my home like she was conducting an inspection, her keen eyes cataloging every change I'd made since her last visit 3 months ago. "You've certainly put your stamp on this place," she observed, running her finger along the newly painted windowsill in the kitchen. "Very rustic. Grandmother would be interested to see what you've done with her formal dining room." I had converted the stuffy formal dining room into a cozy reading nook with built-in bookshelves and a comfortable reading chair positioned to catch the afternoon light. It was one of my favorite improvements. But Catherine's tone made it sound like I'd committed an act of vandalism. She always said this house should be lived in, not preserved like a museum, I replied, accepting the tin of muffins and setting it on the counter. "Oh, absolutely," Catherine agreed quickly, but her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Though, of course, maintaining property value is important too, especially with real estate markets being so volatile these days. She moved to the kitchen island and spread her hands across the granite surface like she was claiming territory. "This house still carries her energy, doesn't it? Rose always kept these windows open this time of year, said fresh air prevented bitterness from settling into the corners." She laughed at her own words, but the sound felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this entire conversation in advance. She did love her fresh air. I agreed, already sensing that this wasn't going to be a simple social visit. Catherine began tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the counter, a nervous habit that usually preceded difficult conversations. You know, sweetheart, I've been thinking about your situation here. And by thinking, I mean really considering all the angles, all the potential complications you might not have thought about yet. What kind of complications? I asked, though my stomach was already starting to clench with familiar anxiety. Well, for starters, the financial responsibility is enormous. Do you have any idea what the annual property taxes are on a place like this? We're talking about $47,000 a year, minimum. Then there's insurance, and good luck finding coverage that'll protect you against hurricane damage at anything less than $18,000 annually. Maintenance on a property this size and age, you're looking at $25,000 to $30,000 every single year just for basic upkeep. The numbers felt like punches to my solar plexus. I had known the expenses would be significant, but hearing them laid out so starkly made my savings account feel pathetically inadequate. And that's assuming nothing major goes wrong, Catherine continued, clearly sensing my growing anxiety. God forbid you need a new roof, or the septic system fails, or there's electrical problems in those older sections. You could be looking at $50,000 to $100,000 in emergency repairs without any warning. She paused to let these financial realities sink in, watching my face carefully for signs of panic. Now, I'm not trying to scare you, she said, though that was exactly what she was doing. I'm just being realistic about what you're taking on here. And honestly, sweetheart, real estate management has never been your strong suit. Remember that little condo you and David bought? The one where you couldn't even figure out how to work with the HOA when the neighbors complained about your wind chimes? The reference stung because it was true, but also completely unfair. The condo situation had been complicated by a vindictive neighbor and an HOA president who had it out for anyone under 40. But Catherine had a gift for taking complex situations and reducing them to simple narratives that made me look incompetent. I've been discussing this with your father, she continued, and we think we might have a solution that could take all this pressure off your shoulders. Here it comes. I thought, Madison has been doing absolutely phenomenally with her real estate portfolio. Did you know she just acquired her 16th investment property, a gorgeous historic renovation in Charleston that she's converting into luxury short-term rentals? The woman has a gift for maximizing property potential. I wanted to point out that Madison's gift was largely funded by family money and connections, but I held my tongue. She really understands market dynamics, zoning laws, property management systems, all the complicated business aspects that would probably give you a migraine just thinking about them. Catherine's tone suggested this was a compliment, but it felt more like an insult wrapped in concerned packaging. What exactly are you suggesting? Mom. Well, what if we could structure things so that you get all the benefits of living in this beautiful house without any of the headaches of actually owning it? Madison could take over the title, just temporarily, just for legal and financial purposes, while you continue living here exactly as you are now. The words hit me like a physical blow. You want me to sign over my inheritance to Madison? Oh, honey, no, that's not what this is about at all. Catherine's voice took on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood arguments. This would just be a legal restructuring to protect the asset and streamline management. You'd still live here, still consider it your home. Madison would just handle the business side, taxes, insurance, maintenance contracts, all that boring paperwork you hate dealing with. But the house would legally belong to her. Well, yes, technically, but only on paper. It's really more like having a property manager who happens to be family, someone you can trust completely to have your best interests at heart. The irony of that statement was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Trust Madison to have my best interests at heart? The same Madison who had convinced our parents to give her my college fund because she, Needed it more for her business? The same Madison who had somehow ended up with Grandma Rose's antique jewelry collection, despite Rose specifically telling me it would be mine someday. And honestly, Catherine continued, mistaking my silence for consideration, it would be such a relief for you, wouldn't it? No more lying awake at night worrying about maintenance issues or property taxes or legal liability. Madison would handle all of that, and you could just focus on acquittites, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish here. That last phrase, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish here, carried a dismissive weight that made my chest tighten with familiar shame. In Catherine's world, my need for space and healing wasn't a legitimate life goal. It was just self-indulgent wallowing that needed to be managed and eventually corrected. The conversation continued for another hour, with Catherine cycling through various emotional manipulation techniques I recognized from decades of experience. Concern trolling about my financial security, flattery about how generous and family-oriented I was, subtle threats about the consequences of being stubborn or prideful. And underneath it all, the constant implication that I was simply not capable of handling adult responsibilities without help from more competent family members. When she finally left, promising to put together some preliminary paperwork so you can see how simple this would be, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The beautiful morning energy had been completely poisoned, replaced by a familiar cocktail of self-doubt and resentment that I thought I'd left behind. That afternoon, I walked down to the mailbox just to escape the suffocating anxiety Catherine had left in her wake. The ocean breeze usually cleared my head, but today all I could hear were her words echoing on repeat. Not your strong suit, financial responsibility, temporary legal structure. As I trudged back up the long driveway, I found myself remembering every time I'd been told I wasn't quite good enough, smart enough, responsible enough to handle important decisions. Every family meeting where my input was politely acknowledged and then completely ignored. Every holiday gathering where I'd end up in the kitchen cleaning while Madison held court in the living room, entertaining everyone with stories of her latest business conquests. But this time felt different. This wasn't about hurt feelings or bruised ego. This was about my future, my security, my connection to the only person who had ever believed in me unconditionally. Grandma Rose hadn't left me this house so I could hand it over to Madison at the first sign of pressure. She'd left it to me because she saw something in me that my parents had consistently failed to recognize. That evening, the family dinner felt more like an ambush than a social gathering. That evening's family dinner felt more like a carefully orchestrated intervention than a casual meal. Catherine had insisted we all gather at the estate, since you have such a beautiful dining room now, and it's been so long since we've all been together. But the timing felt too convenient, too calculated. Robert arrived precisely at 6:30, carrying a bottle of expensive wine that I knew he'd expensed to his law firm somehow. Madison swept in 15 minutes later, making her usual dramatic entrance in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The dining room, my former reading nook that Catherine had passive-aggressively criticized earlier, felt too small for the weight of their collective presence. Robert methodically carved his herb-crusted sea base like he was performing surgery, each movement precise and deliberate. Madison picked at her artisanal salad while scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing us photos from her latest business trip to Napa Valley, which looked suspiciously more like a luxury vacation. "So Mom caught me up on the house situation," Madison said, not looking up from her phone. "Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about taking on another property right now. My portfolio is already at 17 units, and I'm looking at that waterfront development opportunity in Kiowa Island. 17 units. The number had grown since Catherine's earlier claim of 16. Madison had this habit of inflating her success in real time, like she was bidding at an auction where the currency was parental approval. But if it would help you out, she continued with studied casualness, I suppose I could make room in my management structure. I mean, someone needs to handle the business side of things, and it's not like you've ever shown much interest in real estate investment strategies. The condescension in her voice was so thick, I could have scraped it off with a knife. This was the same Madison who had needed Daddy's money to buy her first rental property. The same Madison who had called me in tears 2 years ago when her luxury Airbnb in Asheville turned out to be in a flood zone and cost her $75,000 in damages. It's really just about optimizing the asset, Robert added, finally joining the conversation. From a tax perspective, having the property under Madison's LLC structure could save thousands annually. She's got the depreciation schedules, the expense tracking systems, the professional relationships with contractors and property managers. I noticed how they talked about my inheritance like it was a business problem that needed solving, not a home that held decades of memories and emotional significance. To them, Grandma Rose's legacy was just another asset to be optimized, leveraged, and managed by the more qualified family member. Plus, Madison added, warming to the subject, I've already got relationships with luxury rental agencies. This place could easily bring in $8,000 to $12,000 per week during peak season. You're basically sitting on a gold mine and not even realizing it. The idea of turning Grandma Rose's sanctuary into a revolving door of wealthy strangers made my stomach turn. This wasn't just about money or property management. This was about completely transforming the fundamental nature of the place that had given me peace for the first time in years. What if I don't want to turn it into a rental property? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine, Robert, and Madison exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their collective opinion of my business acumen. Well, and of course that would be your choice, Catherine said carefully. But sweetheart, you have to be realistic about the economics. The carrying costs alone are probably $90,000 to $100,000 per year. How exactly are you planning to cover that on your current income situation? My current income situation. Another perfectly crafted phrase designed to highlight my perceived inadequacy. I was freelance writing and had some savings from the divorce settlement, but they made it sound like I was destitute and irresponsible. I need some time to think about all this, I said, setting down my fork because I'd completely lost my appetite. Of course. Robert nodded sagely. It's a big decision, but don't think too long. Property markets move fast, and opportunities have a way of evaporating if you wait too long to act. Madison's smirk was barely concealed. Take all the time you need. It's not like the offer has an expiration date or anything. Well, now, after they finally left, Madison speeding away in her white Tesla Model S, Catherine and Robert following in their matching luxury vehicles, I sat alone on the porch trying to process what had just happened. The evening air was cool and salty, but instead of calming my nerves, it felt heavy with the weight of unspoken threats and manufactured urgency. Catherine had left another manila folder on the kitchen counter, this one thicker than the first. When I opened it, I found what looked like professionally prepared documents, property transfer forms, LLC incorporation papers, financial projections showing how much money the house could generate as a luxury rental. Everything was formatted to look official and legitimate, complete with legal-sounding language about strategic asset optimization and family wealth preservation. But something felt off about the whole presentation. The documents weren't quite right, formatting inconsistencies, legal terminology that sounded important but didn't actually mean anything specific. It reminded me of those scam emails that tried to look like they came from your bank but had subtle errors that gave away their fraudulent nature. I spent the next 2 hours researching property law and inheritance regulations online, trying to understand whether what they were proposing was even legal. What I found made my blood run cold. In North Carolina, once you transfer property ownership, even temporarily, getting it back requires either the new owner's voluntary cooperation or a lengthy, expensive legal battle. There was no such thing as temporary property ownership from a legal standpoint. If I signed those papers, Madison would own my inheritance. Period. The more I researched, the more I realized how sophisticated their manipulation strategy was. They weren't just pressuring me to make a bad decision. They were systematically undermining my confidence while creating artificial urgency around a fake deadline. The property market wasn't moving any faster than usual. There was no time-sensitive opportunity that required immediate action. This was all manufactured pressure designed to push me into signing away my rights before I had time to think clearly. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear Catherine's voice saying, "Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish here," with that dismissive tone that made me feel like a child playing house in an adult's world. By 3 a.m, I was wide awake, pacing the hardwood floors and checking locks with an anxiety that felt completely disproportionate to the situation. The next morning brought new developments that made my sleepless night seem prophetic. I was making coffee when I heard footsteps on the front porch, not the confident stride of a family member, but hesitant, nervous steps that suggested someone who wasn't sure they should be there. Through the window, I saw a man in his mid-30s wearing an ill-fitting suit and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. He kept checking his phone and glancing around nervously, like he was following directions to a location he'd never visited before. When he knocked, it was with the apologetic tapping of someone who didn't want to be there but felt obligated to follow through. "Hi," he said when I opened the door, extending a sweaty hand for a handshake. "I'm Todd Harrison. Your mother Catherine sent me. I'm here to help you sort out the property situation." Something about his demeanor immediately set off alarm bells. Real lawyers don't look nervous about meeting with clients. They don't carry beat-up briefcases or wear suits that look like they came from a discount rack. And they definitely don't introduce themselves with that rising intonation that turns statements into questions. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any appointments scheduled today," I said, not moving to let him inside. "Oh, Mrs. Murphy, Catherine, said you'd be expecting me. I have all the paperwork ready to go. Should just take a few minutes to get everything sorted out." The fact that he called my mother Mrs. Murphy when her name was Mrs. Patterson, she'd kept her maiden name for professional reasons, was another red flag. Any legitimate lawyer working with our family would know basic details like that. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. Todd fumbled with his briefcase, pulling out a folder that looked suspiciously similar to the ones Catherine had been leaving around. "Just standard property transfer documentation. Very routine stuff. Just need your signature on a few forms and we'll have everything tidied up. Are you licensed to practice law in North Carolina, Todd?" His face went pale. "Well, I'm working under the supervision of a licensed attorney. I'm more of a paralegal, an assistant. I'm here to help facilitate the process." "Who's the supervising attorney?" That would be... Let me check my notes." He shuffled through papers with the desperation of someone who hadn't prepared for basic questions. The firm is Patterson and Associates. Patterson and Associates was Robert's firm. My father was arranging for fake legal representation for a property transfer that would benefit his other daughter. The audacity was breathtaking. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said firmly. "I'm not signing anything today. Or any day. until I've had time to review everything with my own legal representation. Todd's nervous energy shifted into something closer to panic. But Mrs. Patterson said this was urgent, time-sensitive. Something about market conditions and tax implications if we don't get this filed before the end of the quarter? More manufactured urgency. More artificial deadlines designed to pressure me into making decisions without proper consideration. You can tell Mrs. Patterson that I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss next steps, I said, starting to close the door. Wait, Todd called out, his professional demeanor cracking completely. She's going to be really upset if I come back without signatures. She said this was supposed to be simple, just a formality. The desperation in his voice made me pause. This man wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just someone who'd been hired to do a job he didn't fully understand. Someone who probably needed the money and hadn't asked too many questions about the ethics of what he was being asked to do. Todd, I said gently, do you understand what these documents actually do? He blinked several times, clearly not prepared for the question. They transfer property ownership to facilitate better management. They transfer legal ownership, period. Once I sign these, I no longer own this house. Do you understand that? The color drained from his face completely. But Mrs. Patterson said it was temporary. Just paperwork to make things easier. There's no such thing as temporary property ownership. Todd, if I sign these documents, I'm giving away my inheritance permanently. And you're helping facilitate that transfer without proper legal representation. I watched the implications sink in. Todd wasn't just a fake lawyer. He was potentially participating in fraud, whether he realized it or not. I need to make a phone call, he stammered, backing away from the door. You do that, I said. And Todd, you might want to think carefully about who's really looking out for your best interests in this situation. After he left, I immediately called the North Carolina State Bar to verify what I already suspected. There was no Todd Harrison licensed to practice law in the state. Patterson and Associates confirmed they had no knowledge of any property transfer work being done on behalf of the Patterson family. The whole thing was a setup. But the most chilling realization was how far they were willing to go. This wasn't just family pressure or emotional manipulation anymore. They had hired someone to impersonate a legal professional. They had created fake documents designed to look official. This was fraud. Plain and simple. I spent the rest of the morning installing a security system, not just cameras, but motion sensors, door alarms, and a direct connection to the local police department. If they were willing to send fake lawyers to my door, what else might they be planning? The cameras went up first, one facing the front entrance, one covering the back door, and one positioned to monitor the driveway. The system connected to my phone, so I'd get instant alerts if anyone approached the property when I wasn't expecting them. As I was testing the motion sensors, my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. How did your meeting with Todd go? Hope everything went smoothly. Let me know if you have any questions about the paperwork. Love you. The casual tone, the exclamation points, the love you sign off, and it was all so normal, so motherly, that for a moment I almost doubted my own perceptions. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Todd really was just a paralegal who was nervous about meeting new clients. Maybe I was being paranoid and dramatic, just like they'd always said I was. But then I remembered the look on Todd's face when I explained what the documents actually meant. The genuine shock and panic when he realized he might be participating in something illegal. That wasn't the reaction of someone who was part of a legitimate legal process. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Madison. Mom said you might have some questions about the property management stuff. Happy to walk you through my system anytime. The sooner we get this sorted out, the sooner you can stop stressing about all the complicated business stuff. The emoji at the end was particularly galling. like this was all just sisterly support and helpful advice, rather than a coordinated effort to steal my inheritance. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I spent the afternoon researching inheritance law, property fraud, and elder abuse, because even though I wasn't elderly, the manipulation tactics were remarkably similar to what scammers used against vulnerable seniors. What I found was both validating and terrifying. Everything they were doing, the fake urgency, the manufactured financial pressure, the introduction of fake professionals, the gradual isolation from independent advice was textbook inheritance fraud. The only difference was that instead of strangers targeting an elderly victim, these were my own family members targeting me. That evening, I was reviewing security camera footage from the day when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. At 2:17 p.m., while I was out running errands, someone had entered the house through the back door. The timestamp showed they were inside for exactly 11 minutes. I fast-forwarded through the footage, watching a figure in dark clothing move through my home with obvious familiarity. They went straight to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept important documents, and removed several papers. Then they moved to my home office and spent several minutes at my desk before leaving the same way they'd entered. The person was too small to be Robert, and the gate was wrong for Catherine. This was Madison, moving through my house like she owned it. Taking whatever she wanted while I was away, I called the police immediately. The police officer who responded to my call was Detective Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She reviewed the security footage 3 times, taking notes and asking detailed questions about my family dynamics and the recent pressure to transfer the property. "This is definitely breaking and entering," she said, pausing the video at the moment Madison's face was clearly visible. "But because it's family, and because you haven't explicitly told them not to enter the property, it's going to be complicated to prosecute. However, this footage, combined with the fake lawyer incident, suggests a pattern of fraud that we should definitely investigate." Detective Martinez suggested I document everything, every conversation, every text message, every attempt to pressure me into signing documents. She also recommended I consult with an independent attorney, someone with no connection to my father's firm or my family's business interests. "In my experience," she said, "when family members are this desperate to get their hands on someone's inheritance, there's usually more going on than meets the eye. Have you checked your credit report recently? Bank accounts? Any other financial accounts they might have access to?" Her questions sent a chill down my spine. In my focus on the house, I hadn't considered what else they might be targeting. That night, I spent 4 hours reviewing my financial life with a fine-tooth comb. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Someone had used my Social Security number to apply for 3 different credit cards over the past 2 months. 2 applications had been denied, but one, a platinum card with a $50,000 limit, had been approved and was already carrying a $12,000 balance. The billing address was listed as Madison's business office in Charleston. The charges included luxury hotel stays, designer shopping sprees, and something called consultant fees paid to various LLCs I'd never heard of. Madison hadn't just broken into my house. She'd been systematically stealing my identity for months. My hands shook as I called the credit card company to report the fraud. The customer service representative was helpful but matter-of-fact, explaining that identity theft by family members was unfortunately common and often difficult to prosecute because victims were reluctant to press charges against relatives. "The good news," she said, "is that you're not liable for the fraudulent charges. The bad news is that this kind of systematic identity theft usually escalates if it's not stopped immediately. You need to freeze your credit, file police reports, and consider legal action against the perpetrator." I hung up the phone, feeling like I was living in a nightmare version of my own life. These weren't strangers who had targeted me randomly. These were the people who were supposed to love and protect me. The people who had raised me, who knew my social security number and mother's maiden name and all the personal details that made identity theft possible. The next morning brought a development that shifted everything into high gear. I was making breakfast when I heard multiple cars in the driveway, not just one or two vehicles, but what sounded like a small convoy. Through the window, I saw Catherine's Lexus, Robert's BMW, Madison's Tesla, and a van I didn't recognize with Coastal Property Services painted on the side. They weren't just visiting. They were moving. I watched through the security cameras as Madison directed two men in work uniforms toward the back of the house, pointing and gesturing like she was giving them instructions. Catherine and Robert approached the front door while Madison supervised what appeared to be some kind of equipment being unloaded from the van. When Catherine knocked, it was with the confident authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Emma, a sweetheart, we need to talk," she called through the door. "There's been a misunderstanding about the property transfer timeline, and we need to get some things sorted out today." I didn't open the door. "What kind of things?" "Mom?" "Well, the tax filing deadline is tomorrow, and if we don't get the ownership transfer completed today, you're going to be hit with a massive penalty. We're talking about potentially $30,000 in unnecessary fees." Another fake deadline. Another manufactured crisis designed to pressure me into immediate action. "I'll handle my own tax obligations." I called back. "Honey, you don't understand. The penalty structure for properties this size is incredibly complex. Madison's accountant has already prepared all the paperwork to file under her LLC, which would save you thousands of dollars." Through the camera, I could see the workers Madison had brought with her moving around the back of the house. One appeared to be examining the locks on the guest house, while another was setting up some kind of equipment near the main electrical panel. "What are those men doing?" I asked. "Oh, just some routine maintenance that Madison arranged. Since she'll be taking over property management, she wanted to get a head start on some necessary upgrades. They were preparing to take over my house while I was still living in it. The audacity was breathtaking. I need everyone to leave my property immediately," I said firmly, "including the workers. Emma, don't be ridiculous. We're trying to help you. This is all for your benefit." I said, "Leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police." There was a pause, and I could hear Catherine and Robert conferring in low voices on the other side of the door. "Fine," Catherine said finally, her voice taking on a sharp edge I rarely heard. "But you're making a mistake, sweetheart. A very expensive mistake that's going to cost you dearly." Through the cameras, I watched them gather their equipment and workers, but not before Madison spent several minutes on her phone, gesturing angrily and speaking in animated tones to whoever was on the other end. As soon as they left, I called Detective Martinez to report the attempted unauthorized work on my property. She arrived within an hour, bringing with her a specialist from the Financial Crimes Unit who was particularly interested in the identity theft aspects of the case. "Your family has been very busy," Detective Martinez said after reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered. "Fake legal representation, identity theft, breaking and entering, attempted fraud. We're looking at multiple felonies here. The question is, how far are you willing to go to stop them?" The answer was simple: as far as necessary. Over the next week, working with my new attorney, a brilliant woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in inheritance fraud, we built an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming. Security camera footage of Madison breaking into my house, documentation of the fake lawyer scheme, credit card fraud using my stolen identity, and a paper trail showing how they'd been planning this takeover for months. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Madison's business partner, Jessica Walsh, contacted me directly after learning about the investigation. She'd become uncomfortable with Madison's increasingly erratic behavior and financial irregularities in their shared business ventures. Madison has been using company credit lines to fund personal expenses, Jessica told me during a recorded phone call. She's been claiming that her family investment property was generating rental income that she was funneling through our business accounts. When I asked for documentation, she got defensive and started talking about how she was going to own a multi-million-dollar estate soon. Jessica provided bank records showing how Madison had been using their business accounts to pay for the fake lawyer, the identity theft applications, and even the workers who had shown up at my house. Everything had been financed through fraud and embezzlement from her own business partner. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 3 days after Jessica contacted me, Madison showed up at my house alone, clearly distraught and desperate. She'd been drinking, something I could smell before she even started talking, and her usually perfect appearance was disheveled and frantic. "You ruined everything," she said, swaying slightly on my front porch. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Jessica is threatening to press charges. The police are investigating our business accounts. I could lose everything because you couldn't just be grateful for our help." "Grateful?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Madison, you stole my identity. You broke into my house. You hired a fake lawyer to try to steal my inheritance. And you want me to be grateful. I was trying to save you from yourself," she screamed, abandoning any pretense of sisterly concern. "You've never been able to handle responsibility. You couldn't keep your marriage together. You can't maintain a career. You can't even manage your own finances without making stupid decisions." The mask was finally off completely. This wasn't about helping me or protecting family assets. This was about Madison's pathological need to control everything and everyone around her, combined with a desperate craving for what she saw as rightfully hers. "This house should have been mine," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "I'm the one who visited Grandma Rose every week. I'm the one who helped her with her medications and her grocery shopping. I'm the one who actually understood her business interests and investment strategies." The lies were so blatant they took my breath away. Madison had visited Grandma Rose maybe 6 times in the last 5 years of her life, and usually only when she needed money or wanted to show off some new business success. I was the one who had spent countless hours listening to Rose's stories, helping with her garden, and simply being present in a way that had nothing to do with future inheritance prospects. She left me the house. Madison, not you, me. And no amount of scheming or manipulation is going to change that. "We'll see about that," Madison snarled, pulling out her phone. "I've got lawyers, too. Emma, real lawyers. And I'm going to prove that you're mentally unstable and incapable of managing a property this valuable. I'm going to show the court exactly how you've been living out here like some kind of hermit, making irrational decisions and cutting yourself off from family support." The threat was empty, and we both knew it. After everything that had been documented, the fraud, the identity theft, the breaking and entering, no court was going to rule in Madison's favor. But desperation makes people say stupid things, and Madison had clearly reached the end of her rope. "You should go," I said calmly. "And you should probably call a lawyer, a real one this time, because Detective Martinez wants to speak with you about the credit card fraud and the fake legal representation." Madison's face went white. "You called the police?" "I called the police when you broke into my house and stole my documents. Everything else just snowballed from there." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before. Genuine fear. Not the manipulative crocodile tears she'd used to get her way since childhood, but actual terror at the consequences of her actions. "This isn't over," she said finally, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since the moment you decided to steal from me instead of respecting Grandma Rose's wishes." The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Madison's business partner filed embezzlement charges. The credit card company pursued identity theft charges. The State Bar opened an investigation into Robert's potential involvement in the fake lawyer scheme, and I filed for a permanent restraining order against all 3 family members. The court hearing was surreal. Sitting in that formal room, listening to lawyers present evidence of my own family's systematic betrayal, felt like watching someone else's life unfold. Catherine, Robert, and Madison sat at the defendant's table looking like strangers, well-dressed, respectable people who had somehow lost their way so completely that they were willing to destroy their own daughter's life for money. Judge Patricia Harrison, no relation to the fake Todd Harrison, reviewed the evidence with the thorough attention it deserved. Security camera footage, bank records, credit reports, recorded phone conversations, witness testimony from Jessica Walsh, everything painted a picture of calculated fraud that had been months in the planning. "This court has seen many inheritance disputes," Judge Harrison said when the evidence presentation was complete. "But rarely have we encountered such a systematic and multifaceted attempt to defraud a legitimate heir of their inheritance. The defendants have engaged in identity theft, fraud, criminal impersonation, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit theft." She turned to look directly at my family. "The evidence shows that these crimes were not committed in a moment of desperation or poor judgment, but were part of a coordinated campaign spanning several months. The defendants created fake legal documents, hired individuals to impersonate legal professionals, and used the victim's stolen identity to rack up thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt." The restraining orders were granted immediately. Madison was sentenced to 18 months in prison for the identity theft and embezzlement charges. Robert lost his law license and faced ethics charges from the State Bar. Catherine avoided jail time, but was ordered to pay restitution for the financial damages their scheme had caused. But the real victory wasn't the legal judgment. It was the moment I realized I was finally free. Standing on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. Not the fragile quiet of someone trying to avoid conflict, but the deep, unshakable peace of someone who had fought for what was rightfully theirs and won. The house felt different now. Not because the physical space had changed, but because it was truly, legally, unquestionably mine. No more manufactured deadlines or fake legal documents. No more family members who smiled while planning my destruction. Just me, my inheritance, and the memory of a grandmother who had seen something in me that my parents never bothered to notice. I found Grandma Rose's letter that night, tucked away in her old writing desk. She'd left it for me to find when I was ready, when I had proven to myself that I was capable of protecting what she'd entrusted to me. "My dearest Emma," it read in her familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you've learned to fight for yourself. I always knew you had that strength inside you. I just had to wait for you to discover it too. This house isn't just your inheritance, sweetheart. It's your foundation. Build something beautiful on it." 6 months later, I converted the guest house into a writing retreat for women recovering from toxic family relationships. I started a blog about inheritance fraud and emotional abuse that reached hundreds of thousands of readers. I planted a memorial garden for Grandma Rose using flowers from seeds she'd saved over decades. And most importantly, I learned that sometimes the fight isn't about winning or losing. It's about refusing to be invisible anymore. It's about standing up and saying, "I exist, I matter, and I won't let you erase me. Now, if you're watching this, and you've ever felt like you don't belong in your own family story, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not a placeholder. You don't need permission to protect what's yours. Your peace, your dignity, your legacy, your future. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And never, ever let anyone convince you that their comfort is more important than your survival. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you have every right to take up space in this world. Regardless of what anyone else thinks you deserve,